All right, everyone, get ready for a wild ride because we're going back in time to tackle a period of history that's often misunderstood. The Middle Ages.
Ooh, the Middle Ages. Sounds exciting.
You know the image?
Mhm.
Knights, castles, maybe not the best hygiene practices.
Right, lots of dirt.
Yeah, but what if I told you that this image is only part of the story?
Well, now you've got me hooked. What's the real story then?
Well, for this deep dive, our mission is to sort out the fact from the fiction and explore the world of the Middle Ages.
So we're going to find out if it was really all doom and gloom or if there was more to it.
Exactly. We're going to separate fact from fiction, debunk some myths, and maybe uncover a few surprises along the way.
I'm ready to have my mind blown.
All right, so first things first, the term Dark Ages. Where did that come from?
It's a bit of a misnomer. The term actually originated during the Renaissance.
Ah, the Renaissance. That was a while after the Middle Ages, right?
Right, and well, the Renaissance was all about celebrating the classical world. Ancient Rome and Greece.
Right, they're obsessed with the classics.
Yeah, so Renaissance thinkers saw the period after Rome's fall as a kind of decline.
So they were basically looking back with rose-tinted glasses, thinking everything was better back then.
Pretty much. And unfortunately, that view stuck, and it's colored our perception of the Middle Ages ever since.
So time to ditch the dark label, I think. What was really going on during this era, we always hear about castles and knights.
Ah, yes, castles. Those were impressive structures.
But were they just about warfare, or was there something more to them?
Castles were much more than just fortresses. They were architectural marvels, constantly evolving to meet new challenges. We're talking thick walls, moats, drawbridges, all strategically designed.
So it's a combination of, like, engineering and strategy.
And social organization, too. Castles served as centers of administration, justice, and even culture.
They were basically like mini-cities.
In a way, yes. They were hubs of activity, not just military strongholds.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got castles, knights. Any other examples of this kind of innovation in the Middle Ages?
Oh, tons. Take the printing press, for instance. It's often associated with the Renaissance, but the technology actually had its roots in the Middle Ages.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, movable type, which is what made the printing press possible, was first developed in China and then made its way to Europe.
So that whole narrative about the Middle Ages being a period of stagnation, not so accurate then.
Not at all. It was a time of cultural exchange and technological advancement. Even something as revolutionary as the printing press has its roots in this era.
Mind blown. Okay, so we've got castles, printing. What about the compass? That must have been a game changer, right?
Huge game changer. And like the printing press, the compass also originated outside of Europe.
Okay, so we're seeing a pattern here. The Middle Ages weren't as isolated as we often think.
Exactly. The compass came from China, and it completely revolutionized navigation, allowing for exploration and trade on a whole new scale.
Wow. It's amazing how these seemingly simple inventions has such a massive ripple effect on history.
It is, and it shows how interconnected the world already was back then. People were sharing ideas and technologies across vast distances.
Okay, so we've got castles, printing, the compass. Anything else from this period that might surprise us?
What about eyeglasses? They literally changed how people saw the world, and they were developed by medieval monks.
Eyeglasses. That's incredible. The real testament to scientific inquiry.
It is. And it challenges that stereotype of the Middle Ages as a time without scientific advancement. Imagine the impact those eyeglasses had on people who were previously unable to see clearly.
It must have been life-changing for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It would have opened up new possibilities from reading to craftsmanship and beyond.
It really makes you think. So were these monks just like secluded figures praying all day, or were they actively involved in scientific pursuits?
Well, while prayer was certainly a big part of monastic life, they also played a crucial role as centers of learning and experimentation.
So they were the keepers of knowledge and
And pioneers of new discoveries. They were studying astronomy, medicine, botany, all sorts of things.
they sound more like Renaissance men, but from the Middle Ages.
They were ahead of their time in many ways, and their work laid the foundation for later scientific advancements.
Wow, I'm starting to see a pattern here. The Middle Ages were much more than just a period of decline. There was real intellectual curiosity.
There was. And a spirit of innovation. And they were willing to learn from each other and build on existing knowledge.
I'm definitely ready to dive deeper into this. What else have we got?
Well, we haven't even touched upon advancements in agriculture, the rise of universities.
Or the church's influence. That must have been huge.
Oh, the church played a massive role in shaping medieval society. But that's a story for another time.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's break down some of those prevailing myths about the Middle Ages. First up, did people really believe the Earth was flat?
Ah, the classic flat Earth myth. Most educated people in the Middle Ages actually knew the Earth was spherical.
So they were more informed than we give them credit for.
Yeah. Way more informed. Scholars even wrote about it and created maps that reflected a spherical Earth.
So where did this whole flat Earth idea come from?
It's a bit of a historical misunderstanding, often perpetuated by people who wanted to paint the Middle Ages as a time of ignorance.
So it's more about pushing a narrative than reflecting reality.
Exactly. It's a good reminder to be critical of the information we encounter and to always look for evidence-based interpretations.
Agreed. Okay, next myth. People in the Middle Ages never bathed. Is that true?
That's another one that gets exaggerated. While their methods might have been different, they did care about cleanliness.
So it wasn't all just, you know?
Yeah, not all just dirt and grime. They washed their hands and faces. Many towns had public bathhouses.
So they had their version of spas, maybe?
You could say that. And they also used perfumes and herbs to keep themselves smelling fresh.
Okay, so maybe the Middle Ages weren't as smelly as we've been led to believe. But what about the role of women? It's often portrayed as a time when women were powerless.
Not true at all. Women's roles were definitely different from today, but they absolutely had influence.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, for one, we have Queen Aethelflaed of Mercia. She was a powerful ruler who led armies and defended her kingdom.
A warrior queen. That's pretty badass.
She was highly respected. And then we have Hildegard of Bingen, a scholar, composer, writer.
She sounds like a Renaissance woman,
Yeah,
but, from the Middle Ages.
exactly. She corresponded with popes and emperors, advised rulers, even founded her own monastery.
Wow, she was a powerhouse.
It just goes to show that women in the Middle Ages were capable of achieving great things. We need to challenge those simplistic narratives.
Definitely. All right, so we've busted a few myths, uncovered some surprising innovations, but let's be real, the Middle Ages weren't a utopia, right?
Of course not. Every historical period has its challenges.
So how do we approach studying this era without, judging it by today's standards?
With empathy and a willingness to see the world through the eyes of the people who lived then.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of dismissing the Middle Ages as just dark, let's explore the complexities.
Absolutely. There's so much more to uncover. The innovations, the legacies that continue to influence us today.
Like the role of the church.
Huge influence. It wasn't just a religious institution. It was a dominant force in every aspect of life. Education, politics, culture.
So it was kind of like a one-stop shop for everything.
In a way, yes. They provided spiritual guidance, but also played a key role in education, healthcare, even social welfare.
Sounds powerful. But didn't that lead to, power struggles with secular rulers?
Absolutely. The relationship between the church and secular rulers was complex, a constant push and pull for power.
Sounds like a recipe for some drama.
Oh, there was plenty of that. But amidst the power struggles, there was also incredible intellectual and artistic flourishing.
And wasn't this the time when the first universities popped up?
That's right. The very first universities, as we know them, were established during the Middle Ages.
Really? So the Middle Ages weren't just about knights and castles. There was serious intellectual activity going on.
Absolutely. Those early universities were centers of learning. They attracted scholars from all over and laid the foundation for higher education as we know it.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've debunked some myths, explored innovations, and glimpsed the church's role. But what about everyday life?
Excellent question. Let's step away from the kings and queens and zoom in on what life was like for ordinary people.
I'm ready for a glimpse into the daily routines and challenges of medieval life.
Imagine a world without electricity, cars, smartphones, a world where most people lived in small villages and worked the land.
Sounds simple, but probably really hard.
Definitely different from today. Life was tough with limited resources and technology, but people were resilient.
So they found ways to adapt to make the most of what they had.
Exactly. They had their festivals, their music, storytelling things that brought them together and made life enjoyable.
It's a reminder that even in challenging times, people find ways to connect and find joy.
That's the human spirit for you. And speaking of human creativity, let's not forget about the incredible art and architecture of the Middle Ages.
Ah, yes. The cathedrals, the tapestry is always so impressive.
Absolutely. And they weren't just for the elite. Think about those towering cathedrals with their stained glass windows and carvings.
So they were meant to inspire everyone, regardless of their social status.
Precisely. And even those who couldn't read could understand the stories depicted in the art. It was a way of making religious teachings accessible to everyone.
It's like a visual language.
Exactly. And the tapestries, beautiful and practical.
So they served a purpose beyond just decoration.
Absolutely. They depicted scenes from history, religious stories, even everyday life. And they also helped to insulate those drafty castles.
So they were functional art. Form and function, the medieval way.
Exactly. And it all gives us a glimpse into the incredible creativity and skills of medieval artists and craftspeople.
Okay, so castles, myths, daily life, art. One more thing. What about law and government? It wasn't all just knights and dragons, right?
Definitely not. The Middle Ages saw the development of important legal systems and early forms of representative government, things that still impact us today.
So they were planting the seeds for democracy.
In a way, yes. One of the most important developments was the signing of the Magna Carta in England in 1215.
The Magna Carta. That's the one that limited the power of the king, right?
Exactly. It established the principle that even the king was subject to the law, and it guaranteed certain rights to the people.
So it was a pretty big deal.
A huge deal.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
considered a cornerstone of modern democracy, and it influenced legal documents around the world.
And it all happened back in the Middle Ages.
It did. It's a reminder that progress and change often have roots in unexpected places.
It definitely challenges our preconceived notions about this era.
That's what we're here for, to challenge those notions and uncover the true story of the Middle Ages.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here in part one of our deep dive into the Middle Ages. We've shattered some myths, uncovered surprising innovations, and I think we have a better appreciation for the complexities of this often misunderstood time period.
We've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much more to discover. The rise of towns and cities, the Black Death, the flourishing of literature.
Well, I am definitely eager to continue our journey through the Middle Ages in part two.
You know, it really is remarkable how that Dark Ages label just won't go away.
Yeah, it's like no matter how much evidence we throw at it, it just sticks around.
Right, like a bad smell.
Exactly.
Even when we know it doesn't reflect reality.
And it makes you think about, the power of narratives and how they shape our understanding of history.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
love to simplify things, slap a label on it, and call it a day.
Right. But history is rarely that simple.
Never.
And that actually brings up a really important point, bias.
Bias in historical accounts.
Mm-hmm. Like we were talking about earlier, that Dark Ages label came from Renaissance scholars.
Yeah, those guys loved their ancient Rome and Greece.
They did.
I mean, I get it. The classics are amazing.
Totally. But they had this agenda, They wanted to make their own time look even more impressive by making the Middle Ages look bad.
So it's like the grass is always greener on the other side of history kind of thing.
Exactly.
They were looking back with rose-tinted glasses, totally romanticizing the past.
Totally. And unfortunately, that's influenced how we viewed the Middle Ages ever since.
But as we've been discussing, it wasn't all doom and gloom.
Not at all.
It was a time of, innovation, cultural exchange, even progress.
And it laid the foundation for everything that came after, the Renaissance included.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling into that trap of judging historical periods based on, labels and preconceived notions?
I think it starts with curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, and being willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Don't just take everything at face value.
Exactly. Dig a little deeper. Explore different sources.
Ask questions, like we're doing right now with this deep dive.
Yeah, exactly.
Questioning the Dark Ages label, and look where it's gotten us.
Look at all the fascinating stuff we're uncovering.
A much more complex story.
Right. And always remember, history is about people.
Okay, so it's not just about dates and battles and kings and queens.
It's about their lives, their motivations, their challenges and triumphs.
Putting yourself in their shoes.
Exactly.
Seeing the world through their eyes.
Yeah. And that brings us to another important point, broadening our perspective beyond Europe.
Right. We can't just focus on one part of the world.
The Middle Ages were a global phenomenon.
Yeah, we've already talked about how inventions like the printing press and the compass came from China.
Exactly. Ideas and goods were flowing across continents.
So the world was already pretty interconnected, even without airplanes and the internet.
Oh, it was. Maybe not at the speed we're used to today, but connected nonetheless.
So we need to see the Middle Ages in a global context.
We need to recognize everyone's contributions and influences.
To get the full picture.
Exactly. Otherwise, we're missing a huge part of the story.
Okay, that makes total sense. So to really understand the Middle Ages, we need to ditch The Eurocentric lens.
We need to embrace a more global perspective.
Okay. So now that we're thinking globally, let's go back to something we touched on earlier.
What's that?
The Magna Carta.
Ooh, the Magna Carta. A big one.
It's considered, a landmark document for democracy.
Absolutely.
But what was so revolutionary about it, especially for its time?
Well, think about it. Back then, kings were pretty much all-powerful.
They did what they wanted.
Pretty much. But the Magna Carta challenged that authority.
It said, hey, king, you're not above the law.
Exactly. It established the idea that the king was subject to the law, just like everyone else.
And it protected certain individual rights.
Right. It was a huge shift in the power dynamic.
From ruler to the ruled.
Exactly.
A step toward a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. It was a radical concept back then.
Yeah, I can imagine. But was it really that effective? I mean, it was just a document signed by a king, right? A king who was probably forced into it.
Well, true. King John signed the Magna Carta under pressure.
He didn't have much choice.
But the principles it laid out, they resonated with people.
They sparked something.
They did, and for centuries after, people kept coming back to the Magna Carta.
It became this symbol.
A symbol of resistance against tyranny, a rallying cry for people fighting for their rights.
And it influenced legal documents around the world.
It did.
It's incredible to think that a document from, the 13th century is still relevant today.
The power of ideas, right?
Absolutely. And it shows how those ideas can transcend time and place.
Totally. The Magna Carta was a seed that was planted in the Middle Ages.
And it's still bearing fruit today.
It is. It reminds us that even in times of turmoil and upheaval, progress can happen.
And it might not happen overnight, but those small steps can lead to lasting change.
Exactly. And speaking of tumultuous times, we can't forget about the Black Death.
Oh yeah, the Black Death. A devastating period in history. One of the most devastating pandemics ever. Wiped out a huge chunk of the population.
It was a truly horrific event. The suffering must have been unimaginable.
How did people cope? How do you even begin to process something like that?
Well, it was a time of immense fear.
I can imagine.
And grief.
Of course.
Social structures were completely disrupted.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around.
People were desperate to understand the cause, to find ways to stop it from spreading.
Did they know what caused it back then?
Not really. There were theories.
But nothing concrete.
No, and that lack of understanding, it led to some pretty dark things.
Like what?
Scapegoating, persecution, social unrest.
People looking for someone to blame.
Exactly. But, even in the midst of all that darkness, there were also glimmers of hope.
Really?
Yeah, there were acts of courage, compassion.
People helping each other.
Absolutely. Caring for the sick, burying the dead.
Supporting one another through it all.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
Even in the face of tragedy, we find a way to come together.
We do, and that's something worth remembering. The Black Death, and awful as it was, it also led to some positive changes.
You mean, aside from getting rid of the plague?
Right. For one thing, it created a labor shortage.
Okay.
And
yeah.
that gave peasants more bargaining power.
So because there were fewer workers, they had more leverage.
Exactly.
Huh. So this horrible event actually contributed to the decline of serfdom.
It did.
It's wild. It's like this unintended consequence.
History is full of them.
It makes you realize that, even the most devastating events can have ripple effects that we don't anticipate.
Totally.
And those effects can sometimes lead to positive changes in the long run.
Yeah. It's a good reminder to look for the complexity in everything.
Right. So we've got the Black Death, labor shortages, serfdom declining. What else do we have up our sleeve?
Oh, we're just getting started. Remember all that talk about the Dark Ages being a time of intellectual stagnation?
Yeah, but we've already debunked that pretty thoroughly.
We
because there was so much innovation and knowledge sharing going on.
Exactly. And one area where that really flourished was in art and literature.
Oh yeah, we can't forget about those magnificent cathedrals and tapestries.
Absolutely. But there's more. What about the written word?
Storytelling.
Yep. The Middle Ages produced some incredible literature.
Like what kind of stuff?
Epic poems, romances, religious texts, philosophical treatises.
Wow, so they had it all.
They did. There was something for everyone. Tales of chivalry, reflections on faith, the meaning of life.
Pretty deep stuff.
Yeah. One of the most famous works is the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer.
I remember reading that in school. A bunch of pilgrims on a journey, each telling a story.
Exactly. It's a window into medieval society.
Showing all the different walks of life.
All those different voices and perspectives.
It's amazing how much we can learn from stories, even ones written centuries ago.
Totally. And then, of course, you've got the epic poems, the Song of Roland.
Oh yeah, that one's all about knights and
Yeah.
heroism battles.
Exactly. Fighting for honor and glory.
Those classic medieval themes.
Totally. And it also reflects that complex relationship between Christianity and Islam.
Which was a mix of conflict and cultural exchange.
Exactly. The Middle Ages were not a monolith.
It wasn't just one culture or belief system.
Not at all. It was a melting pot of different cultures and experiences.
And those differences are reflected in the art, the literature, the music.
Absolutely. And it's something we need to keep in mind as we continue to explore this era.
To appreciate the full spectrum of human experience during that time.
Exactly. And speaking of continuing to explore,
Oh, there's more.
so much more.
I'm all ears. Wow, we've covered so much ground already in our deep dive into the Middle Ages. It's amazing to think about all the myths we've debunked and all the fascinating things we've discovered.
We have, haven't we? But there's still so much more to explore. The Middle Ages were such a dynamic and transformative period.
I know, I can't believe how much we've learned already, but I'm ready for more. What else can we uncover about this era that's often mislabeled as the Dark Ages?
Well, let's move away from those grand narratives of kings and queens and zoom in on something else that was happening, something that had a huge impact on medieval society.
What's that?
The rise of towns and cities.
Oh, the cities, that's a good one.
Oh,
We tend to think of the Middle Ages as being all about rural life and castles and knights.
that's the image we often have, but the emergence of cities was a real game changer.
In what way?
Well, think about it. Cities were these centers of trade and craftsmanship and innovation.
People flocking to the cities for new opportunities.
Exactly. Merchants, artisans, scholars, laborers, all drawn to the cities for a chance at a new life.
So it was a real mixing pot of people and ideas.
Absolutely. And that created a dynamic environment that fostered creativity and entrepreneurship and social mobility.
People weren't as bound by those old feudal structures anymore.
Exactly. They could create their own destinies based on their talents and hard work.
It sounds like the rise of cities brought about a lot of social and economic changes.
It did. And it was during this time that guilds also started popping up.
Guilds, those were...
Associations of craftspeople and merchants.
Right, right. So they were like early versions of unions or professional organizations.
In a way, yes. They set standards for their trades, trained apprentices, and supported their members.
And they helped to shape the economic and social fabric of medieval cities.
Exactly. They played a huge role in making cities run smoothly and fairly.
It's fascinating how many systems and structures we have today have their roots in the Middle Ages.
It really is. It shows how much influence this period had on the world we live in today.
Okay, so we've explored the rise of cities and the importance of guilds. But what about the role of religion? We've touched on the church's influence, but were there any other big religious developments during the Middle Ages?
Well, you can't talk about the Middle Ages without mentioning the Crusades.
Ah, yes, the Crusades, those epic religious wars that lasted for centuries. They're often portrayed as this clash of civilizations between Christianity and Islam. But was it really that simple?
No, not at all. The Crusades were complex events driven by multiple motivations.
So it wasn't just about religion.
Religion was definitely a big factor, but there were also political ambitions, economic motives, a thirst for adventure even.
It's like this mix of, I don't know, idealism and pragmatism.
Exactly. And while the Crusades ultimately failed to achieve their main objective, which was capturing Jerusalem, they had a huge impact on Europe.
In what way?
Well, they exposed Europeans to new cultures, new ideas, new technologies.
So a clash of cultures, but also a cultural exchange.
Exactly. And the Crusades also stimulated trade and economic growth, even if it wasn't the intention.
It's a good reminder that history is rarely straightforward. Even events with negative consequences can have unintended positive effects.
Absolutely. It's all about that interplay of different forces and motivations, and it's what makes studying history so fascinating.
It's like a puzzle with a million pieces, and we're slowly putting it all together.
Okay, so we've talked about cities, guilds, the Crusades. What else is there to uncover about the Middle Ages?
Well, remember how people used to view the Middle Ages as this period of intellectual stagnation?
Yeah, we debunked that myth pretty quickly.
Right. We saw how much innovation and knowledge sharing was happening.
The printing press, the compass, even eyeglasses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that intellectual curiosity, it wasn't limited to just technology.
There was also a philosophical and scientific awakening brewing.
Absolutely. During the Middle Ages, scholars were pushing the boundaries of knowledge, challenging traditional ways of thinking and paving the way for the Renaissance.
So it wasn't just about faith and dogma.
Not at all. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Roger Bacon were rediscovering ancient Greek and Roman texts, engaging in debates, conducting experiments, and basically laying the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would come later.
Wow. It's like the Middle Ages were the incubator for the Renaissance. You could say that. It was a time of intellectual ferment, and that, combined with the social and economic changes we've been talking about, it created the perfect conditions for the Renaissance to blossom.
I'm starting to see how all these different pieces of the puzzle fit together. From castles and cathedrals to the rise of cities and universities, the Middle Ages were far from a dark age.
Exactly. They were a vibrant and transformative period that shaped the course of Western civilization.
Well, I think we've done it. We've successfully debunked the myth of the Dark Ages and shown just how dynamic and innovative the Middle Ages really were.
We have. We've journeyed from castles to cathedrals, explored legal documents and religious movements, and delved into the lives of both ordinary people and extraordinary figures.
It's been an incredible journey, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this deep dive into the Middle Ages.
Me too. And if this has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to keep exploring.
There are so many resources out there: books, museums, documentaries. Even just talking to people who are passionate about history.
Exactly. Never stop learning and never stop asking questions.
Because the more we learn about the past, the better equipped we are to understand the present and to shape the future.
And who knows, maybe you'll even uncover some hidden gems of your own.
That's the beauty of history. There's always something new to discover.
Well said.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the Middle Ages. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring.